The chill of the wooden seat seeped through my attire as I remained still, hands resting demurely in my lap, embodying the role of a compliant spouse. Across from me, at the polished expanse of his legal counsel's table, Elias was ensconced, his impeccably tailored suit a testament to his affluence, his grin broad and self-assured. He radiated the aura of someone who had already secured victory, perhaps believing he had. "You will never again have a taste of my wealth, not for the remainder of your days," he murmured, his voice a mere whisper, audible only to his attorney. The inflection mirrored the same dismissive tone he'd employed when dictating my need for his permission before undertaking grocery errands or explaining the necessity of relinquishing my personal credit facility. He appeared as triumphant as a hunter displaying his most significant quarry. Perched in the spectators section behind him, Kendra, her meticulously manicured digits delicately caressing her designer handbag, leaned forward slightly, a smirk playing on her crimson lips that churned my stomach. "That's right, darling," she mouthed, her voice laced with an unctuous sweetness. She addressed him as darling, a term of endearment I once used when I harbored the illusion that our union held genuine significance, when I believed the man I wed truly existed. Seated beside Kendra, Elias's mother, Dorotha, presented a picture of serene companionship, as if they were intimates planning an exclusive social engagement. Her hair, drawn into a severe chignon, framed a countenance dominated by frigid blue eyes that seemed to scrutinize me as if I was some unsightly residue she had inadvertently encountered. Her antipathy towards me was palpable, an unwavering sentiment, since the day Elias introduced me to their household 8 years prior. In her estimation, I was an inadequate match for her esteemed son, lacking sufficient financial standing, social grace, and pedigree to bear the Caldwell name, a constant refrain. "She deserves not a single cent," Dorothea proclaimed, her voice resonating in the hushed chamber. Her pronouncement was accompanied by a smile, the same disingenuous expression she reserved for me each Christmas when presenting a department store gift voucher, a stark contrast to the opulent jewelry bestowed upon Kendra. Even prior to the revelation of his infidelity, Dorothea had evidently been orchestrating my obsolescence. My legal representative, Mr. Raw, sat beside me, his fingers idly sifting through documents. He exhibited an air of trepidation, suggesting an awareness of our imminent financial ruin. Elias's legal retinue comprised 3 barristers from the most prestigious and costly establishment on Fifth Avenue. Their briefcases bulged with evidentiary materials designed to portray me as unemployable, devoid of marketable skills, and deserving of nothing beyond a meager subsistence. Their narrative cast me as a predatory opportunist who had ensnared their vulnerable client. Judge Wallace, a woman in her late 50s, possessed a penetrating gaze and hair streaked with silver. She had absorbed their arguments throughout the morning. Renowned for her stern yet equitable rulings, she rarely smiled and appeared unimpressed by ostentatious attire or celebrated legal minds. However, even she seemed poised to favor Elias's position. "Your Honor," Elias's principal counsel announced, rising with a substantial binder in his grasp. "My client has demonstrated considerable magnanimity. Mrs. Caldwell possesses no professional history. Her academic attainment is limited to a secondary school diploma, and she has no personal assets. She has enjoyed a life of comfort for 8 years, without contributing to the household economy. A modest, periodic disbursement would be entirely fair." A mirthless laugh threatened to escape me. No work history? I had meticulously managed Elias's entire social calendar, orchestrated his professional engagements, and overseen all domestic operations that ensured the seamless functioning of his life. No education. I held a baccalaureate degree in marketing, a qualification I never utilized as Elias had persuaded me that professional employment was superfluous. No assets. This was a direct consequence of every attempt I made to accumulate savings or establish an independent account, each met with Elias's rationalizations for its impossibility. Yet I remained silent, adhering to the expected persona, the image of a dependent, incapable woman, ignorant of fiscal matters, business acumen, or the realities of the world. I had inhabited this character for so long that I occasionally found myself believing it. Elias directed his gaze towards me, his dark eyes alight with palpable satisfaction. He was convinced he had utterly vanquished me. For the preceding 6 months since uncovering his clandestine affair, he had meticulously prepared for this very moment. He had systematically transferred funds, concealed assets, and ensured that all property appeared to be exclusively his. He presumed my intellectual deficiency and my timidity would prevent any form of resistance. Mr. Raw slowly ascended to his feet, his demeanor akin to that of a man marching towards his own demise. Your Honor, I wish to submit one final piece of evidence on behalf of my client. His voice quivered slightly as he retrieved a solitary white envelope from his briefcase. Mrs. Caldwell has prepared a personal letter for the court's consideration. Elias's attorney exchanged bewildered glances. They had received no prior notification of such a document. Elias's brow furrowed, the assured smile on his lips faltering slightly. Kendra shifted in her seat, her previously impeccable posture subtly compromised. Dorothea's icy stare intensified as she observed Mr. Raw approaching the judicial bench. Judge Wallace accepted the envelope and carefully opened it. The courtroom descended into such profound silence that the faint rustle of paper as she unfolded the letter was distinctly audible. Her eyes scanned the page, absorbing its contents with silent concentration. Initially, her expression remained impassive. Then, gradually, her eyebrows began to ascend. She continued reading for what felt like an interminable duration. Elias's legal team commenced hushed consultations amongst themselves. Elias himself fixed his gaze upon me, attempting to decipher the nature of my written submission and its potential significance. He retained an air of confidence, yet a new element flickered in his eyes, a nascent hint of apprehension. Having concluded her perusal, Judge Wallace lifted her gaze to address the assembly. Then an astonishing event unfolded. She began to laugh, not a polite titter, but a deep, resonant peal of mirth that echoed through the room. She laughed so heartily that she had to set the letter aside and remove her spectacles to dab at her eyes. "Oh, this is quite excellent," she declared softly, her voice carrying with remarkable clarity throughout the hushed space. "This is truly remarkably excellent." The confident smiles evaporated from their faces as if a switch had been abruptly flipped. Elias's complexion drained of color. Kendra's jaw slackened slightly. Dorothea's glacial composure fractured, and for the first time in 8 years, she exhibited genuine fear. A subtle smile played at the corner of my lips. Finally, after months of meticulous planning and preparation, the moment had arrived for them to confront the unvarnished truth. 3 years prior, I believed I was experiencing marital bliss. Elias would return from his professional endeavors bearing floral tributes, greet me with a kiss at the threshold, and express his profound gratitude for my presence in his life. We resided in his family's magnificent estate on the Upper East Side, characterized by its pristine white columns and impeccably maintained grounds. I felt as if I were a princess in a romantic fable. "Serena, financial concerns are entirely unnecessary," Elias assured me one evening as we occupied our seats at the dining table. He meticulously carved his filet mignon, his movements mirroring the precision instilled by his mother's tutelage. My earnings are sufficient for both of us. Your sole responsibility is to cultivate a beautiful domestic environment. I had been employed at a modest marketing firm downtown, assisting local enterprises with their advertising initiatives. I relished my work, the intellectual challenges it presented, and the sense of accomplishment derived from successful campaign execution. However, Elias had been subtly suggesting for months that I should tender my resignation. But I find enjoyment in my work, I responded, twirling pasta around my fork, and the additional income aids our future savings. Elias set down his cutlery and regarded me with those dark eyes that once stirred a flutter in my heart. My dear, your modest salary is hardly impactful. It barely covers your transportation and professional attire. Would you not prefer to dedicate your time to perfecting our home, perhaps initiating plans for offspring? The dismissive descriptor, modest salary, caused a flush to creep up my neck. My income was respectable, adequate for covering essential household expenditures and bills. Yet, as I surveyed the opulent dining room, adorned with its crystal chandelier and imported furnishings, I felt diminished. Perhaps he was correct. Perhaps my contributions lacked substantive value. I suppose I could take some respite from work, I acquiesced softly. Elias's smile was radiant. That's my intelligent girl. You will discover considerably more contentment within the domestic sphere. Within a month, I had resigned from my position. Elias assumed complete control of our financial affairs, citing administrative convenience through a singular account. He provided me with a credit card for household expenditures, instructing me to apprise him of any additional requirements. Initially, the sense of being cared for was gratifying. I occupied my days with redecorating our residence, preparing elaborate culinary creations, and meticulously organizing Elias's professional gatherings. However, a subtle shift began to occur. The credit card's credit limit was restrictively low, and Elias scrutinized every transaction. When I procured new draperies for the living area, he questioned my unilateral decision-making. Upon spending $50 at the grocery establishment, he demanded a detailed accounting of every item. Serena, we must exercise great fiscal prudence, he admonished one evening, reviewing the card statement with a crimson pen. This expenditure at the coffee establishment, what was its purpose? I met with my friend Chloe for coffee, I explained, feeling akin to a chastised child. It was a mere $8. $8 here, $12 there. These minor sums accumulate. Perhaps you could extend invitations to your friends to visit our home. It presents a more cost-effective alternative. I ceased arranging social engagements over coffee. Subsequently, I refrained from purchasing new apparel without prior authorization. Then I abandoned acquiring any item deemed non-essential. Elias lauded my newfound responsibility and my understanding of our financial constraints, yet I observed his continued acquisition of expensive suits and his indulgence in professional luncheons that exceeded my entire weekly allowance. Dorothea exacerbated the situation. Elias's mother frequented our residence every Sunday, invariably offering critiques regarding my domestic management. The floral arrangements in the garden were aesthetically displeasing. The pot roast lacked adequate seasoning. My attire was deemed insufficiently formal for a Caldwell family repast. Elias, my dear, she commented one Sunday, meticulously portioning her roast into minute pieces. I encountered a most charming young lady at the country club yesterday, Kendra Sterling, an interior designer by profession. She hails from a most respectable lineage, and her work is nothing short of exquisite. Elias responded with a polite nod, but I detected a flicker of interest in his expression. I may have heard of her contributions, exceptionally talented. You ought to engage her services for the refurbishment of the guest quarters, Dorothea continued, deliberately avoiding eye contact with me. They could benefit from a professional sensibility. I had invested weeks in meticulously decorating those guest chambers, selecting hues and fabrics that I found aesthetically pleasing. Yet as I sat there, absorbing Dorothea's pronouncements, I felt an overwhelming sense of inadequacy. My efforts were amateurish, falling short of their family's elevated standards. "An excellent suggestion, Mother," Elias affirmed. "Serena, what are your thoughts?" What recourse did I possess? To articulate my desire to preserve the rooms I had diligently adorned, to concede that engaging another professional would be an admission of my inherent failure. "Naturally," I responded, my smile feeling artificial. "Whatever you deem most appropriate." It was then that the clandestine telephone conversations commenced. Elias would retreat outdoors to conduct his calls, citing professional exigencies. His evening work hours became increasingly extended, resulting in his return home after I had already partaken in solitary dinner. When I inquired about his day, his responses became progressively terse and devoid of detail. "How did the Corbus project meeting transpire?" I inquired one evening as he unfastened his necktie. "Satisfactorily," he replied curtly, his gaze averted. "The usual client demands, but—" That morning I had glimpsed his planner left on the kitchen counter. It listed no Corbus meeting. Instead, an entry read Chaos 10 Quack, accompanied by the name of an unfamiliar establishment. I began to meticulously scrutinize aspects I had previously overlooked. Bank statements Elias hastily concealed. Phone calls abruptly terminated upon my entry into the room. A new fragrance, distinctly different from his customary cologne. Shirts returned from the dry cleaners bearing lipstick marks that were not my shade. One evening, while tidying his freshly laundered garments, I discovered a crumpled receipt within the pocket of his trousers. It bore the imprint of an upscale downtown restaurant, dated the preceding Tuesday. The itemized bill indicated sustenance for 2 individuals, inclusive of champagne and dessert. However, on Tuesday evening, Elias had informed me that he was working late at the office, engrossed in paperwork. My hands trembled as I clutched the receipt. The total sum considerably exceeded my monthly allowance. Someone had indulged in lobster and chocolate souffle, dishes Elias had consistently deemed prohibitively expensive when perusing menus together. I sank onto the edge of our bed, the slip of paper a tangible testament to the revelation, and felt an internal fracturing. This was not a matter of financial strain or professional pressure or familial obligations. This was about deception. This was about Elias leading a clandestine existence separate from my presence. That night, when Elias returned, exuding a perfume that was not my own, I maintained a placid demeanor. I offered a smile and inquired about his day, to which he recounted meetings I now knew to be fabrications. I feigned attentiveness, served his dinner, and perpetuated the charade of normalcy. Internally, however, my strategic planning had already commenced. The subsequent morning, I awaited Elias's departure for work before commencing my preparations. Forsaking my usual routine of domestic organization, I donned dark denim trousers and a baseball cap. I felt like a clandestine operative in a cinematic production, except this was the unraveling of my own existence. I navigated my vehicle to Elias's corporate edifice on Fifth Avenue, positioning it across the thoroughfare for an unimpeded view of the entrance. My heart pounded with such ferocity that I feared it might erupt. What precipitous course of action was I undertaking? Discreetly tailing my own husband as if I were some obsessive figure, yet an unwavering need to ascertain the veracity of the situation compelled me. At precisely 11:30, Elias emerged from the building, not unaccompanied. A woman with cascading blonde tresses, clad in a crimson coat, walked beside him. Her beauty was striking, eliciting a physical discomfort within me. She was tall, elegant, possessed of an impeccable bearing, and attired in costly garments, everything I perceived myself to be not. They entered Elias's vehicle in unison, their conversation punctuated by shared laughter. As they spoke, the woman placed her hand upon his arm, and Elias returned her gaze with the same affectionate expression he once reserved for me. I maintained a discreet distance, trailing his vehicle through the urban arteries, meticulously ensuring I remained undetected. Their destination was the Caldwell Refuge, an establishment of considerable elegance, where Elias had previously escorted me for our anniversary celebration 2 years prior. The very same restaurant where he had articulated that dining out was financially untenable due to our savings imperative. Through the establishment's window, I observed them seated at a secluded corner table, their hands intertwined above the pristine white tablecloth. The woman could only be Kendra Sterling, the interior designer Dorothea had referenced. She was even more striking up close, her makeup flawless, and her jewelry undoubtedly possessing a value exceeding that of my automobile. She tenderly touched Elias's face, and he, in turn, clasped her hand and kissed her palm. A constricting sensation seized my chest, as if compressed by a vice. I remained in my vehicle for 2 hours, a silent observer of their repast, their merriment, and their affectionate demeanor, portraying themselves as a devoted couple. As they ultimately departed, Elias escorted her to a silver BMW parked nearby. Their parting was sealed with a kiss, not a perfunctory peck, but a prolonged embrace sufficient to compel me to avert my gaze. That afternoon, Elias returned at his customary hour, recounting a narrative of a demanding client consultation. He lamented the tedium of his day, expressing a desire to have spent it in my company. I responded with placid affirmations, offered a smile, and presented him with the dinner I had somehow prepared amidst the disintegration of my world. "How was your day, my dear?" he inquired, slicing his chicken with an air of utter normalcy. "Tranquil," I replied. "I occupied myself with reorganizing the closets and engaging in some reading." "That's my dutiful girl," he responded, reaching out to pat my hand. "Always occupied." A primal urge to shriek surged within me, to hurl my plate against the wall and demand the identity of Kendra and the duration of their clandestine liaison, yet instead I clasped his hand and inquired if he desired dessert. In the ensuing weeks, I cultivated an expertise in their clandestine movements. I became intimately acquainted with their established patterns: midday meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, afternoon engagements that transpired to be evening repasts on Fridays, and weekend excursions Elias characterized as professional conferences. They frequented art exhibitions, wine tastings, and exclusive boutiques, where Kendra would peruse garments whose costs surpassed my cumulative expenditures over 3 months. Elias procured for her an array of jewelry, floral arrangements, and designer accessories. These acquisitions were financed through credit facilities entirely unknown to me. The most agonizing aspect was witnessing his palpable happiness in her presence. He exhibited more genuine laughter during a single afternoon with Kendra than he had demonstrated with me over the course of the preceding year. He held doors open for her, retrieved her chair, and regarded her with an intensity that suggested she was the sole focus of his fascination. These were gestures he once reserved for me during the period when our marital bond held genuine substance. One Saturday, I followed him to an equestrian center situated in upstate New York, an establishment where Dorothea held membership. I positioned my vehicle outside the perimeter and observed through the fencing as he and Kendra engaged in a spirited game of tennis. Dorothea was also present, seated on the patio, her applause erupting when Kendra executed a skillful shot. Post-match, The trio convened for refreshments. Dorothea, uncharacteristically animated, gestured expressively and laughed heartily as she conversed with Kendra. She affectionately touched Kendra's arm and offered approving nods to her every statement. It was unequivocally evident that Dorothea was not merely privy to the affair, but actively facilitated it. I drove back to my solitary residence, the silence amplifying the stark reality. This was not merely an instance of Elias engaging in infidelity. It was a calculated orchestration of my complete displacement. Dorothea had identified an individual she deemed worthy of her son, and collectively, they were endeavoring to expunge me from their lives. That evening, Elias returned bearing superficial abrasions on his arms, remnants of their tennis match. When I inquired about their origin, he attributed them to the exertion of moving boxes at his office, snagging his arm on a nail. Another fabrication delivered with such effortless conviction that it prompted me to question the veracity of countless assertions I had passively accepted over the years. "Elias," I began carefully, "your mother mentioned that interior designer again during dinner last week, Kendra Sterling. Have you given any consideration to engaging her services?" His countenance remained unperturbed, yet I detected a subtle, almost imperceptible hesitation before he responded. "Oh yes, I explored her profile, but her fees are rather substantial. Perhaps next year, when the business climate improves. She must possess considerable talent to command such rates. One presumes so. I have not, in fact, made her personal acquaintance." Lie upon lie upon lie. I responded with a nod, a smile, and a pretense of credulity. Internally, however, I was diligently compiling a comprehensive record. Every fabricated account, every meticulously constructed pretext, every instance where he met my gaze and dissembled about his whereabouts and his companions. 2 months into my clandestine investigation, a profound realization dawned, fundamentally altering the trajectory of events. Elias was not merely engaged in an illicit affair. He harbored intentions of divorcing me and securing Kendra as his life partner, while simultaneously ensuring I received no financial remuneration from the dissolution of our marriage. All those discussions concerning fiscal matters, the stringent limitations imposed upon my expenditures, the deliberate methods employed to render me financially dependent, these were all integral components of a premeditated scheme. His plan was to initiate divorce proceedings and assert my lack of contribution to our marital assets. He would retain possession of the estate, the vehicles, the investments, indeed all assets. I would be left destitute while he embarked upon his new life in concert with Kendra and under the benevolent approval of his mother. However, Elias had committed a critical miscalculation. He erroneously believed me to be excessively fragile and intellectually deficient to mount a defense. He remained oblivious to my vigilant observation, my acquisitive learning, and the meticulous formulation of my counter-strategy. As I lay beside him that night, listening to his steady slumber, I arrived at a resolute decision. If Elias wished to engage in a contest of financial manipulation and deception, I would master the art of its execution with superior skill. The following morning, I awaited Elias's departure for a client meeting, which I knew to be a luncheon engagement with Kendra. Subsequently, I ventured into his private study, an action I had never before undertaken. Elias's study constituted his sanctuary, the solitary domain within our residence that I was strictly forbidden from tidying or organizing. He invariably secured it with a lock when he was absent, yet I had observed his clandestine placement of the key beneath his desk lamp several months prior. My hands trembled as I inserted the key, turned it, and stepped into the room. The study was meticulously arranged, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a capacious desk laden with various documents. I possessed no definitive objective, yet I understood the imperative to commence somewhere. I initiated my search within the desk drawers, carefully examining folders and papers. The majority comprised uninspiring business correspondence that eluded my comprehension. Contracts pertaining to construction endeavours, missives from clientele, invoices for materials. However, within the lowest drawer, I discovered a significant item. A folder marked Personal Accounts, containing bank statements I had never encountered. Elias maintained 3 distinct banking accounts, the existence of which was entirely unknown to me. The statements revealed substantial financial transactions, both inbound and outbound, far exceeding my estimations of his business revenue. There were deposits from companies I had never heard of and cash withdrawals that seemed too large for normal expenses. I took pictures of everything with my phone, being careful to put every paper back exactly where I found it. My heart was pounding so fast I felt faint, but I kept going. If Elias was hiding money from me, I needed to know how much and where it was. In the filing cabinet, I found more surprises. There were documents for a corporation called Caldwell Holdings LLC, which Elias had never mentioned. According to the papers, this company owned several properties around the city. Properties, Elias had told me, belonged to his clients. One folder contained receipts for expensive purchases I didn't recognize. A watch that cost $15,000. A vacation to the Maldives we never took. Jewelry from stores I had never been to. All of these things were paid for with money from accounts I didn't know existed. But the most shocking discovery was in a folder marked Legal Documents. Inside were papers from an attorney I had never heard of discussing something called asset protection strategies. The documents talked about moving money to offshore accounts and creating shell companies to hide wealth from potential creditors or legal claims. I didn't understand all the legal jargon, but I understood enough to know that Elias was purposefully hiding money. He was preparing for something, and I had the terrible feeling that something was our divorce. I spent 3 hours in that office, taking pictures of every document that looked important. By the time I heard Elias's car pull into the driveway, I had everything locked back up and was in the kitchen preparing lunch as if nothing had happened. "How was your meeting?" I asked as he kissed me on the cheek. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "The Valoria project is moving faster than expected." Another lie. I had seen his planner and there was no Valoria project, but I smiled, nodded, and asked if he wanted a sandwich. That afternoon, I did another thing I had never done before. I called my old friend, Chloe Hayes, who worked as an accountant downtown. We had lost touch after I quit my job, but I hoped she would still help me. "Serena," Chloe said when she answered the phone. "Long time no talk. How are you?" "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Chloe, I need some advice on some financial documents. Could we meet for coffee?" "Sure, is everything okay? You sound worried." "I'll explain when I see you." We met at a small out-of-the-way coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Elias might go. Chloe was the same as ever with her curly red hair and kind smile, but when I showed her the photos on my phone, her expression turned serious. "Serena, where did you get these documents?" she asked, scrolling through the images. "They're my husband's business papers. I found them in his office." Chloe was silent for a long time, studying each image carefully. Finally, she looked up at me, concern in her eyes. "Serena, some of these transactions look very suspicious. This shell company, the offshore accounts, the cash withdrawals. This looks like money laundering." "Money laundering?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means taking money from illegal activities and making it look legal by running it through different accounts and companies. It's a very serious crime." My stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" "I'm no criminal investigator, but I've seen enough financial fraud cases to recognize the patterns. Look at this." she said, pointing to one of the bank statements. Your husband is taking large cash deposits from companies that don't seem to exist. Then he's moving that money through several different accounts before it ends up in banks in tax havens. That's classic money laundering behavior. I felt the room spinning. What should I do? You need to talk to someone who specializes in white-collar crime. I know a detective who works these kinds of cases. His name is Detective Major, and he's very good at his job. Do you want me to give you his number? I nodded, unable to speak. Chloe scribbled the detective's information on a napkin and handed it to me. Serena, please be very careful, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. If your husband is involved in money laundering, it could be dangerous. Don't let him know you figured anything out. I drove home in a daze, the detective's phone number burning a hole in my pocket. Elias was in his office when I got back, probably moving more illegal money while I made dinner. I cooked, I cleaned, and I acted normal, but inside I was terrified. That night, as Elias slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I had learned. My husband wasn't just cheating on me and planning to leave me with nothing. He was a criminal who had been using our marriage as a cover for illegal activities. But for the first time in months, I felt something other than fear and sadness. I felt rage. Elias had lied to me about everything. He had stolen from me and he was planning to destroy my life. But now I had information that could destroy his. Tomorrow I would call Detective Major. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. I left for work before dialing Detective Major's number. My hands were shaking so badly I had to try 3 times before I got all the digits right. Detective Major, White Collar Crimes Unit. A deep voice answered. Hello, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My name is Serena Caldwell. Chloe Hayes gave me your number. I think my husband might be doing something illegal with money. There was a pause. Mrs. Caldwell, can you come down to the precinct this afternoon? I'd like to discuss this in person. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a small office at the police precinct, across from a man in his 40s, with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. Detective Major had the photos from my phone spread out on his desk, studying them with a serious expression. Mrs. Caldwell, how long has your husband been involved in these financial activities? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. I just found these papers yesterday. I had no idea any of this existed. Detective Major nodded. It's common in these cases. Spouses are often unaware of their partner's illegal activities. He pointed to one of the bank statements. These transactions show a clear pattern of money laundering. Your husband is receiving large amounts of cash from dubious sources and running it through multiple accounts to conceal its origin. What kind of dubious sources? I asked. Based on these amounts and patterns, likely drug trafficking money, illegal gambling, or other organized crime activities. Your husband's real estate development business provides the perfect front to wash dirty money through the buying and selling of properties. How much time could he face in prison for this? I asked. Money laundering is a serious felony. Depending on the amounts involved, he could be looking at anywhere from 10 to 20 years in federal prison, plus massive fines and forfeiture of all assets bought with illegal money. All assets? I repeated. Everything, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, the investments. If they were purchased with laundered funds, the state will seize them. My mind raced. If Elias went to jail and lost everything, what would happen to me? I would be left with nothing, just as he had planned. Except now it would be because he was a criminal, not because he had outsmarted me in divorce court. Detective Major, I said slowly, what if I helped you build a case against him? What if I could get more evidence? He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Mrs. Caldwell, that would be very dangerous. If your husband suspected you were investigating him, he could turn violent. These kinds of people don't take kindly to betrayal. But I'm already in danger, aren't I? If he's involved with criminals, if he plans to divorce me and leave me penniless, I'm not safe anyway. Detective Major was silent for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I have access to his office, his computer, his files. I could copy more documents, record conversations, maybe even find out who he's working with. But I would need protection and I would need assurances about what happens to me when all this is over. What kind of assurances? I want immunity from any charges related to his crimes. I want protection if he tries to hurt me. And I want to keep some of the assets that were purchased with legitimate money from his real estate business. Detective Major smiled for the first time since I arrived. Mrs. Caldwell, you're thinking like a prosecutor. Let me make some calls and see what we can arrange. 3 days later, I met with Detective Major and an assistant district attorney named Ada Sola. They had prepared an official cooperation agreement that gave me everything I had asked for in exchange for my help in building a case against Elias. Mrs. Caldwell, Ada Sola explained, you'll be working as a confidential informant. We will provide you with recording devices and train you on how to gather evidence safely. But you must understand the risks. If your husband finds out what you're doing, you could be in severe physical danger. I understand, I said, signing the papers with a steady hand. When do we start? For the next 2 months, I became a different person. By day, I played the role of the obedient wife, cooking, cleaning, and asking Elias about his day. But every moment he was out of the house, I was working. I installed tiny recording devices in his office and his car. I copied files from his computer onto thumb drives. I photographed every document I could find, building a complete picture of his illegal activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Elias was laundering money for a major drug trafficking organization led by a man named Brace the Bear Rages. He would take cash payments of $50,000 to $100,000, then use his real estate company to buy properties with that money. Later, he would sell the properties and deposit the profits into legitimate bank accounts, making the drug money look clean. But Elias had gotten greedy. Instead of just taking his percentage for washing the money, he had been skimming extra cash for himself. He used this stolen money to fund his affair with Kendra, buying her expensive gifts and taking her on lavish trips. I recorded conversations where Elias boasted to his partner about how easy it was to fool the authorities. I photographed meetings where he took briefcases full of cash from dangerous-looking men. I documented every transaction, every lie, every crime. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. When Elias came home each night, he would kiss me and tell me about his day, making up stories about legitimate business while I knew he had spent the afternoon with drug lords and criminals. You seem different lately, he said one night over dinner. More confident. I like it. I've been reading more, I said, which was true. I had been reading everything I could find on money laundering and financial crime, learning new things. That's wonderful, honey. Knowledge is power. If only he knew how much knowledge I had acquired and how I planned to use that power against him. At the end of the 2 months, Detective Major told me we had enough evidence to arrest Elias and seize all his assets. But I asked for 1 more week. I wanted to be in that divorce courtroom when Elias thought he had won everything. I wanted to see his face when he realized his perfect plan had been destroyed by the wife he thought was too stupid to fight back. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Elias to walk into it. The divorce proceedings began on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom wearing a simple black dress that made me look smaller and more helpless than I felt. Elias arrived with his team of expensive lawyers, all carrying thick briefcases and wearing confident smiles. "Good morning, Serena," Elias said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I hope we can get through this quickly and amicably." I nodded docilely, playing my part to perfection. I just want what's fair, Elias. He patted my shoulder like I was a child. Of course you do, honey. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're well taken care of. Kendra arrived a few minutes later, wearing a stunning blue suit that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. She sat in the gallery behind Elias, her presence a clear message of who would be taking my place. Dorothea sat beside her, both of them whispering and smiling like old friends planning a celebration. When we entered the courtroom, Elias's lead lawyer, Mr. Villabos, now known as Mr. Raw, immediately took control. He was a tall, grey-haired man with an expensive watch, the kind of attorney who charges $1,000 an hour and wins cases through intimidation. Your Honor, Mr. Raw began, this is a simple case. My client, Mr. Elias Caldwell, is a successful businessman who has supported his wife for 8 years. Mrs. Caldwell has no work experience or education beyond high school and has made zero financial contribution to the marriage. She is requesting an unreasonable settlement that would ruin my client's business and livelihood. Judge Wallace listened expressionlessly as Mr. Raw laid out his case. They had charts showing Elias's income, diagrams demonstrating my lack of contribution, and testimony from witnesses who painted me as a gold digger who had trapped an innocent man. Dorothea took the witness stand first, wearing a navy suit and pearls that made her look the perfect society lady. She spoke in a clear, confident voice about how I had never fit into their family. Elias tried so hard to help Serena improve. Dorothea testified he paid for etiquette lessons, bought her suitable clothes, even hired tutors to help her learn about art and culture, but she showed no interest in bettering herself or supporting Elias's career. Every word was a lie, but Dorothea spoke them with such conviction that I almost believed them. Elias had never paid for lessons or tutors. The only thing he had paid for was my silence and my submission. Mrs. Caldwell has no understanding of the social obligations that come with being married to a man of Elias's position, Dorothea continued. She embarrassed him at business events and refused to participate in charity activities. Frankly, I'm surprised the marriage lasted as long as it did. Mr. Raw nodded approvingly. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. No further questions. My lawyer, Mr. Raw, now named Mr. Raw, stood for cross-examination, but he looked nervous and unprepared. Mrs. Caldwell, isn't it true that your son controlled all the finances of the marriage? Elias handled the money because he's good with finances, Dorothea retorted smoothly. Serena showed no interest in learning about such things. And isn't it true that you encouraged your son's relationship with Ms. Sterling? Dorothea's eyes flashed with anger. I have no idea what you are implying. Mr. Raw quickly sat down, clearly outmatched. I wanted to scream at him to fight harder, but I reminded myself that this was all part of the plan. Next, Elias took the stand. He looked handsome and sincere in his dark suit, the picture of the successful businessman taken advantage of by his greedy wife. Your Honor, Elias said, his voice full of sorrow. I loved Serena deeply, but our marriage became impossible. She had no interest in building a life together or supporting my career. She spent money frivolously and refused to take responsibility for managing the home. I tried to help her, but she seemed content to live off my hard work, contributing nothing in return. Mr. Raw guided Elias through a detailed account of our marriage that bore no resemblance to reality. In Elias's version, I was lazy, selfish, and financially irresponsible. He was the long-suffering husband who had tried everything to save our marriage. I asked for a modest settlement that will allow Serena to start fresh, Elias concluded. A small monthly allowance and perhaps some job training to help her become self-sufficient. I bear her no ill will, but I cannot continue to support someone who refuses to support herself. The courtroom was silent when Elias finished, Even I had to admit he was convincing. If I didn't know the truth about his crimes and affairs, I might have believed him. Kendra never testified, but her presence in the room spoke volumes. She sat behind Elias like a queen, waiting to claim her throne, occasionally touching his shoulder or whispering encouragement in his ear. Dorothea smiled at her with obvious approval. When it was my turn to testify, I played my part to perfection. I spoke softly about how I had tried to be a good wife, how I had managed our home and supported Elias's career, in ways that didn't show up on financial statements, but even to my own ears it sounded weak and unconvincing. Mr. Raw's cross-examination was brutal. He made me admit I had no income, no savings, and no job skills. He questioned every expense I had ever made, every decision I had ever taken until I felt like a criminal, on trial, for the crime of being financially dependent. By the end of the day, it was clear Elias had won. His lawyers were smiling. Kendra was practically glowing, and Dorothea looked like she was already planning the wedding reception, but I wasn't worried. Tomorrow, Judge Wallace would read my letter and everything would change. I was sitting in that cold wooden chair, watching Elias whisper his cruel words about never touching his money again. Kendra's sweet voice calling him babe sent a chill down my spine, but I kept my face expressionless. Dorothea's declaration that I didn't deserve one dime should have hurt, but instead it filled me with satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. Mr. Raw rose with shaky hands, pulling out the white envelope that contained 2 months of careful planning. Your Honor, he said, I have one final piece of evidence to submit on behalf of my client. Mrs. Caldwell has prepared a letter for this court's consideration. Elias's confident smile faltered slightly. His lawyers looked confused, whispering to each other about evidence they hadn't been informed of. Kendra shifted in her seat, her perfect posture becoming less perfect. Dorothea's cold eyes narrowed as she watched the envelope reach Judge Wallace. Judge Wallace carefully opened the envelope and began to read. The courtroom was so silent I could hear my own heart beating. I watched her face as her eyes moved across the pages, seeing the moment her expression shifted from mild interest to astonishment, and then something that looked like delight. She read for what felt like an eternity. Elias stared at me, trying to guess what on earth I could have written that held significance. He still seemed confident, but worry was creeping into his dark eyes, the same eyes that had lied to me for years. When Judge Wallace finished reading, she looked up at Elias, then at Kendra, then at Dorothea, and then she burst out laughing. Not a polite laugh, but a deep, genuine laugh that echoed off the walls. She laughed so hard she had to remove her glasses and wipe her eyes. Oh, this is good, she said quietly, her voice ringing out in the silence. Kendra's mouth dropped open. Dorothea's icy composure cracked for the first time in 8 years. Judge Wallace composed herself and looked directly at Elias. Mr. Caldwell, according to this letter, your wife has been cooperating with investigators from the FBI White Collar Crimes Unit for the past 2 months. She has provided exhaustive evidence of your money laundering operation, including recordings, photographs, and financial documents. Elias jumped to his feet. That's impossible. She doesn't know anything about my business. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, Judge Wallace said sharply. The lead investigator from the Financial Crimes Division stated that you have been involved in the illicit transfer of funds for a criminal syndicate engaged in narcotics distribution. You have been systematically siphoning money from your associates in illicit ventures, diverting these funds to sustain an extramarital affair. Kendra let out a gasp, her hand flying to her throat. Elias, what is she talking about? The judge inquired, perusing a letter I had provided. All the jewelry, the exotic vacations, the lavish dinners, the judge continued, reading aloud from my correspondence, all financed with ill-gotten gains from drug trafficking. Ms. Sterling, I would strongly advise you to secure legal representation. Accepting presents, acquired with the proceeds of criminal enterprises, can render you an accomplice to money laundering. Kendra's complexion drained of colour. She stared at Elias in abject horror, comprehending that every gift he had bestowed upon her was tangible proof of grave transgressions. I was unaware, she stammered. I had no inkling. Dorothea rose from her seat, her voice resonating with palpable fury. This is preposterous. My son is a reputable business magnate. Mrs. Caldwell, the judge addressed Dorothea, her gaze conveying a distinct lack of approval. Your son is facing accusations of money laundering, tax evasion, and participation in organized criminal activity. The state intends to confiscate all assets acquired through unlawful means, which it appears includes the family residence, your vehicles, and the majority of his company's equity. Elias's legal counsel was urgently whispering in his ear, but Elias impatiently dismissed him. Serena, you have no comprehension of the ramifications of your actions. Those individuals do not overlook betrayal. You have placed yourself in grave peril. I slowly stood, feeling a surge of strength I hadn't experienced in years. Elias, I understand precisely what I have done. I am aware that you are a criminal who exploited our shared endeavors. I know you intend to leave me destitute while embarking on a new life funded by stolen wealth, and I know you profoundly underestimated my resolve. Judge Wallace offered a subtle smile. Mrs. Caldwell, as a cooperating witness in an ongoing official inquiry, you are entitled to protection and remuneration. The District Attorney's Office has consented to permit you to retain all assets demonstrably purchased with legitimate income derived from Mr. Caldwell's real estate operations. What is the aggregate value of those assets? Elias inquired with desperation. According to the financial forensic analysis, approximately 40% of his assets originated from legitimate business revenue. Mrs. Caldwell will be awarded those assets, in addition to a compensatory payment and a reward from the state for her invaluable cooperation in this investigation. Elias slumped back into his chair, the stark reality of his downfall finally dawning upon him. He had forfeited everything: his enterprise, his fortune, his liberty, and his prospective future with Kendra. This was all due to his assumption that his wife was too feeble and too naive to retaliate. Kendra was now weeping, mascara streaking down her face as she perceived her aspirations of affluence and social standing dissolving into nothingness. Dorothy remained in a state of bewildered silence, witnessing her family's esteemed reputation disintegrate in mere minutes. Furthermore, Judge Wallace announced, officers from the New York Police Department's Major Case Squad are awaiting outside this courtroom to effectuate Mr. Caldwell's apprehension on charges of money laundering, conspiracy, and tax fraud. These divorce proceedings are hereby suspended, pending the resolution of these criminal indictments. The courtroom doors swung open, and the lead investigator, accompanied by two other officers, entered. Elias cast one last look in my direction, his countenance contorted with a potent blend of fury and incredulity. You have no idea what you've unleashed, Serena. I understand perfectly what I have done, I responded with composed equanimity. I have reclaimed my life. As the officers affixed handcuffs onto Elias and recited his constitutional rights, a profound sense of liberation washed over me, a burden I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. For 8 years I had been ensnared in a charade, married to a man who perceived me as nothing more than a convenient facade for his illicit activities. Kendra abruptly exited the room, presumably to contact legal counsel and sever any association with Elias's criminal undertakings. Dorothy followed in her wake. The two women who had conspired to orchestrate my downfall were now confronted with their own impending ruin. I walked out of that courtroom a free woman, financially secure and emotionally unburdened. Elias had imparted to me the wisdom that knowledge equates to power, but he had never envisioned that I would wield that lesson against him. The submissive, helpless spouse he had cultivated was irrevocably gone. In her place stood a woman who had discovered the art of combat and emerged victorious. Did you enjoy my narrative? And from which city are you tuning in? Let's engage in the comments section. If the story resonated with you, your generous support through a super thanks would enable me to continue sharing such tales. I am immensely grateful for your kind patronage. I eagerly anticipate your thoughts on the story. On your screen, you can discover 2 compelling new life sagas that I highly recommend. My channel hosts a wealth of additional content. Please remember to subscribe. Until our next life story. With profound affection and unwavering respect,